Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. This episode of Slam the Gavel is sponsored by CPS Protect Consulting Services. A child protective services case is one of the most frightening experiences for any parent. Don't face it alone. Face it with confidence with Urgent Assist by CPS Protect. You can have access to former CPS investigators to make sure you preserve your rights and protect your family. If you're facing CPS involvement and aren't sure where to turn, their child welfare consultants can help you. Visit cpsprotect.com/subscribe and enter the coupon code Slam the Gavel for 10% off your first year of Urgent Assist. And this is available in all 50 states. Now, also, Bradley's mother, Narcisse Golan, passed away approximately 4 to 5 months ago. Bradley is autistic and needs structured routine and therapies he receives for his autism 6 days a week. However, Italy just entrusted Bradley to Italian social services. If he is ruled to go back, he will face the next 3 to 4 years in the Italian foster care system, where he can't speak or understand the language. He will also be taken away from the only family he has ever known. Please call Governor Hochul, New York State at 518-474-8390. That's Governor Hochul at 518-474-8390 to please keep Bradley here in these United States. Hashtag keep Bradley safe. I have a return guest on. I am happy to have Tim Goldich back on. He's an author. The last time he was on, we discussed how accountability and compassion must go hand in hand. And today we have another new topic we're going to discuss, which is the witch hunts. I welcome you back. Tim, how are you on this day, Sunday?
Oh, well, I'm very good, Marianne, and kind of nervous to be bringing up this particular topic. It's an emotionally volatile subject matter, and many will be very invested in a particular way of framing the witch hunts. And I'm going to do a polemic. I'm going to demonstrate an entirely different perspective on witch hunts.
Okay. Yeah, the witch hunts have always, I don't know, very, very frightening, when we learned about them in school.
Of course, horrifying, yeah.
But however, even more so when we find ourselves in a courtroom with false allegations, which is
Yeah,
basically a witch hunt. But
yeah. Well, that's right. So your standard academic feminist download of what witchcraft is all about is that this witch hunting was basically woman hunting. It was misogyny. It was emblematic of misogyny throughout history, of targeting women for victimization, brutality. It's framed as emblematic of the patriarchy and male dominance and male ruthlessness in maintaining their dominant control over the world and over women. And so I guess before I begin, I just want to say a little something about how poisonous that is. So if it's true, then that's just how it is, and we have to accept it.
mm-hmm.
But what if it's not? What if it's extremely one-sided? What if it's ill understood and ill presented?
Mm-hmm.
You know, this idea, this man bad, the over-empowered oppressor, woman good, the innocent victim, it's a moral polarity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's poisonous all around. It targets men, but see, at the same time that it sort of demonizes men, it infantilizes women, treats
Mm-hmm.
women as if women were just innocent victims. And actually, of course, I believe as a gender equalist that woman is and has always been an equal partner in the human system. applying an equal overall force of influence and equally responsible for outcomes.
Mhm.
So we're going to take a whole nother look at witch hunting and witchcraft, very different from what you would be taught in school. And I'm going to take a look at 6 perspectives, 6 essential aspects of witch hunting that are left out of the standard analysis.
Mhm.
And I'll begin with focus. So there's one of the many facts that gets generally left out is that about 20 to 25% of all the witches that were tried, executed, were and tortured were male, often called warlocks.
Mhm.
And there were some areas like Estonia and Normandy and Iceland that were, for whatever reason, in a particular culture, the vast majority of those who were accused, tried, and executed for witchcraft just happened to be male.
Mhm.
So this a little bit of a shift in focus begins to erode our confidence that that witchcraft was hunted and persecuted, uh, uh, was just a veiled targeting of women. Um, all right, so the number 2 is perspective. So let's take a look at this. Let's imagine an umbrella category that we'll call social dissidence.
Mhm.
And on the one hand, over here, we'll call this heretics.
Mhm.
These will be heretics over there, okay? And those are people with some kind of dangerous ideas with regard to art or even science or religion, you know.
Mhm.
Uh, and over here, we'll call these enemies of the state. And
Mhm.
those those are people that would have some kind of dangerous ideas with regard to politics or military or something like
Mhm.
that. All right. Now, in the category of heretics, I'm going to split that up into, oh, let's see. We can call those, there was bigamy, there was usury, that was borrowing or lending money. There
Mhm.
was apostasy, that was renouncing one's religious faith. There was sacrilege, there was blasphemy, there was infidelism. All right, so there's a bunch of different categories, and witchcraft was just one of them. So all the other categories largely targeted men.
Mhm.
Witchcraft is so infamous because it's the only one that largely targeted women.
Mhm.
Um, there's a historian named Martin Crevel who claims that throughout the early modern Europe, only about 10% of those executed were women. This need not be shocking. This has certainly been true in modern history. Much less than 10% of those who have been executed have been women. Um, all right, so then another thing is scale. Geez, if you read your feminist textbooks, it's not uncommon to read that some 9 million women were executed as witches. Well, but according to non-feminist sources, um, we're talking about from 1450 to 1750 here. That's roughly the era of early modern Europe. One source gives an estimate of 110,000 people were tried for witchcraft in Europe and America, of whom 60,000 were executed. There's really no way of knowing, of course. This all happened like 500 years ago,
Mhm.
and you're relying on whatever archives down in the moldy basements of, churches and so on. And, uh,
Mhm.
you know, so the estimate is pretty rough. But when you're hearing that it's like 9 million, that's completely out of hand.
Yeah, it seems kind of out of whack there.
Yeah, there's just no doubt. There's no doubt. That's especially when you consider the populations of the period.
Mhm.
You know, it's not like as if the human population were in the billions back then.
Right.
Um, all right, and then there's a what I'll call ideological slant. So the assumption that the feminist establishment makes is that that the witch hunting was all about targeting women. It was all about um, punishing women, or you know, keeping women crushed under. A
Mhm.
terrible indictment, by the way. I mean, these indictments of men and masculinity are horrific.
Mhm.
So one thing to understand about it is that witch hunting was not just some excuse to persecute women. Witches weren't just believed to exist, they were known to exist. Okay. It's just exactly as we know terrorists to exist,
Mhm.
right? Few of us have ever actually met a terrorist, but we
Mhm.
have it on good authority that they exist and that they're very dangerous and that we must use any methods necessary to um, apprehend them and to get the information out of them and get them to confess and reveal other terrorists, right?
Mhm.
Well, it was the same back then. You know, this was an era of like the Black Plagues, where a third of the population could die agonizingly.
Mhm.
And they had no clue what was causing this sort of thing to happen. Crop failures, uh, stillbirths,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
diseases that went through the cattle or something. They just had no idea what was causing this. And the fact of the matter is that women more often practiced black magic.
Mhm.
Um, it was a peasant form of magic, and many believed that it was real. And you see, the thing is, this practice of witchcraft was illegal and was
Mhm.
punishable by death. That's just the reality of that time period.
Mhm.
Um, more uh, cultural relativism. It's like the number five. Um, it's hard for us to imagine, but torture was normative in that time period.
Mhm.
Life was a just horrifically difficult, painful, arduous um, task just to try and stay alive. And for legal punishments to have any real effectiveness, they had to be just diabolical. When the stealing a loaf of bread was the only way to feed your family and keep your family alive, what do you
Mhm.
get? The legal punishments against it had to be terrible,
Mhm.
and they were. And I mean, it's very strange. I mean, you go back in time, you're in a different world. There were all these men who would go parading through and they'd be flagellating themselves,
Oh, yeah.
just the the neurosis, we're not allowed to judge anything anymore. Everything's
Mhm.
like, it's all good and we're not supposed to judge anything. But you had these cardinals that be wearing hair suits that would be torturing themselves with. It was a crazy.
Mhm.
And the rationalizations, humans can just rationalize anything. So there was this idea that if you tortured someone hideously enough, you more guaranteed they got into heaven.
Mhm.
It's just
Yeah.
you
Twisted.
can't imagine, but
Mhm.
that was the thinking. And the number six piece that's missing is that many, probably the best evidence suggests that most of the accusers were female, and that these were grudges between women. There's reason to believe that sexually promiscuous women were being accused by other women. So arguably, this was the patriarchy was just like a weapon that one woman might use to attack another, accuse them of something, and then let the patriarchy do the dirty work. You see. Now, why go there? Why do this whole thing? You know, why? Well, because if we are ever going to take a healthier path with this whole gender politics, we have to be more fair. We have to be more balanced. Women basically suffered all things along the respect axis. One of the reasons that women were more often accused of witchcraft was the assumption that women were weak. It's the assumption that women are weak, and therefore the devil, the tempter, could get to them easier. And the real misogyny is and has always been condescension. It's really always been about maintaining women as sort of women and children. And much of that is a withhold of accountability. See, we can't know for certain because the information is spotty, you know, even obsessives that study these things and do deep research. Yeah, there's only so much to go on. But yeah, I mean, it's possible that this was an in-house thing. Women were accusing other women, that this was a hostility of women toward other women, and that women were accountable for it. And if that's true, well, so what? You know, geez, look at what men have done with hostility toward other men, for God's sake. You know, it's hardly as if I'm not claiming that men have the moral high ground by any means. You know, Vlad the Impaler is out there, you know,
Right.
in the vast fields of impaled men. It was just, you know, I'm hardly claiming that men have the moral high ground. I'm just saying that woman and man have always been equal partners. So yes, women have been less respected, but women have been more loved. And men have been more respected, but men have been less loved. And that's got a lot to do with it. Why about 90% of those who were executed were male. And that doesn't even take into account battlefields and stuff. We haven't even looked at the enemies of the state. All the men throughout history who were imprisoned just because they belonged to one faction that either succeeded or failed to take over another faction, you know. The French Revolution. It's possible that as many men died in the 15 months of the French Revolution as women who died in 300 years of witch hunting. The men were not accused of witchcraft. Instead, they were accused of being libertines. They were accused of being anarchists. You know, just labels just about as meaningless to us now as, you know, witches. And so, you know, when it comes to brutality, the total brutality upon the person of man is always exceeded by a wide margin the total brutality inflicted upon the person of woman. This is because in part because men less loved elicit less empathy. Now we can of course redirect our focus on women less respected, and we can do that. But of course, feminism has that well covered, and I can go in vast detail about women being less respected. I'm a gender obsessive, and I know that side of it very very well. And it's the enormous consequences, vast repercussions suffered by women for being less respected. Um, I believe has been matched in full by the enormous consequences of vast repercussions suffered by men for being less loved. And what's important about all this is that from that kind of gender equalist outlook, it becomes at least possible, conceivable at least, for woman and man to call it even. You see, in my judgment, everything really constructive, everything really compassionate, everything to do with real fairness or forgiveness
Mhm.
begins with woman and man calling it even. And then you can go and look at every gender issue,
Mhm.
but now you do so under the assumption that every gender issue is co-created and a matter of shared responsibility between the masculine and the feminine. And you see, then you also remove women from the category of humans known as innocent women and children. You see, and, and and also becomes possible to completely reframe woman's contribution throughout history, and not as property and chattel, but rather as what's
Mhm.
what's true. What's true is that the feminine has always played this equal overall force of influence. It's in everything. And Camille Paglia, one of her wonderfully outrageous statements, she was great at that. She would come up with these wonderful statements that everyone then had to quote at the dinner party. It
Mhm.
really just irresistible. And one of hers was, "If there had never been men, we'd still be living in grass huts." And I
Mhm.
think that's true, but I think it's equally true that if there had never been women, we'd all be living in grass huts because everything was accomplished as a matter of male female tension, uh,
Mhm.
male and female inspiring each other, challenging each other, demanding of each other. That's what built this world.
Mhm.
Uh,
Right.
yeah.
Um, and you could see it even on these home improvement shows
Uh,
with the husband and wife that are taking a house that's, crappy, and their ideas and they're bouncing ideas off of each other and
yeah.
rebuilding it
Yeah.
for better.
Yeah. I know. Incredible as it may seem for anyone who's immersed in academia, actually, woman and man have an enormous amount to be grateful to each other for.
Mhm.
That'll blow minds out there. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
we can look at the ways in which men have oppressed women and women have manipulated men and all these negative outlooks, and okay, there's truth to all that, but let's not forget that there's reason for the sexes to be very very grateful to each other. We would not have the world we have today without that male female uh, I don't know what you call it. I mean, it's this it's this thing between the masculine and feminine that um, has created our world.
Mhm.
It has inspired our world. It has um, each sex endeavoring to compensate. You see,
Mhm.
a man compensating for all that he lacks along the love axis, women compensating for all they lack along the respect axis, each sex sort of digging deep into their uh, what's their bailiwick, as it were, and men obsessed with accumulating respectable qualities and women obsessed with accumulating lovable qualities, and together this has evolved our whole human system.
Mhm.
Things like the Geneva Convention. It was the evolution of human parenting spearheaded by women that has been the evolution of human empathy, of human social skills, emotional intelligence. Um, women are ultimately responsible for the creation of human rights. We just wouldn't have them without a sufficient level of empathy. Such things just
Mhm.
never happen in the ancient world because things are not evolved to that level yet.
Right. And there was, something that I saw on TV about these witch hunts, and this had happened over in England, and apparently I'm not, changing the subject, but this 9-year-old accused her whole family of witchcraft,
Mm,
which was probably could have been brought on by a neighbor or maybe one of their relatives to get even with somebody for something.
yeah.
So so they probably used this kid to tell these lies
Yeah.
and get them all gone. So they kept really good records. Apparently, this area of England kept really good records of names of people who were executed for witchcraft. So they said, they dug in the records and looked through all these books, and 22 years later, they found that this little girl that had grown up was now being convicted of witchcraft, and she was burned at the stake as well.
Huh. That's creepy.
That isn't it? Isn't it? So the karma bus came around, but
Yeah. It was a little late,
yeah.
but yeah, that's interesting.
Mhm.
Well, there's great power in the innocence of children. The whole witch craze in Massachusetts
Mhm.
was driven by four girls and one adult woman.
Mhm.
But it started with a girl who was probably just epileptic
Mhm.
and um, blaming some neighbor or something for putting a hex on her. Yeah, it was.
Mhm.
And then you see there's this enormous instinct to protect, especially these young women.
Mhm.
And I'm sure they were astonished at their power. I'm
Mhm.
sure they grew up under the assumption, well, I'm just a girl, I have no power. What power could I have? And suddenly they must have just been drunk on this power because
Mhm.
wow, they're able to control the whole adult world. They're making these accusations and they writhe around. Only the
Mhm.
one was actually epileptic. The others were just faking it,
Mhm.
and they were getting the whole adult world, and they were able to point the finger at somebody and accuse them, and they
Yeah.
execute. I mean, and they must have just thought, my God, we have absolute power in this situation, and
Mhm.
must have had no comprehension that they could wield power like that.
Even that is creepy.
Yeah,
I mean, they just as you said, just pointed fingers and people were just being thrown into prisons and then waiting to be either hung
yeah,
or,
or tortured for confession, or yeah,
right, right, and the one guy had a bunch of stones piled up on him to crush him.
crushed to death. That's right. Yeah.
So,
Mm.
it's like they were targeting everybody was getting for this.
That's right. That's right. The girls started out with the relatively powerless, but as they got more drunk with power, they just started upping the ante and directing their accusations at more powerful people. Yeah, that guy was just a cantankerous old guy and just refused to confess.
Yeah.
So they just kept dumping stones on him until they crushed him to death. And there were a number of heroes and villains on both sides, both men and women. There was an exquisite letter from the prison that one woman wrote that really was very incredibly moving and went a long way toward putting an end to the whole thing. And there was a man who just before execution calmly stood there and recited the Lord's Prayer,
Mm-hmm.
the 23rd Psalm, and that shook people up because he shouldn't have been able to do that if he was possessed by the devil.
Mm-hmm.
So there were villains and there were heroes in the whole thing on both sides. There were the men who were complicitous because once a judge had condemned someone to death for witchcraft, it now became essential to maintain the fiction because otherwise it's clear that the man was not executed, he was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
See? And so it just shows how the corruption then, feeds on itself.
It did, because I'm trying to think of how many years that all went on in Massachusetts. It escapes me now, but
It wasn't all that long. I think it was like
uh-uh.
20 odd years, maybe less than that. Probably less than that. I don't know. Don't remember.
A scary time to live. I mean, because all of this started over, in Europe, and wasn't it? I can't think of the guy's name. I used to watch all these shows on the Salem, all this stuff, and he over in England, he told, I don't know if it was a bishop, that he would be the one to go and pick out people that were participating in witchcraft,
Uh-huh.
and he got out of hand with everybody.
Oh yeah, sure. He got drunk with power, just
Mhm.
like a Joseph.
Mengele. Uh,
Well, yeah, but I'm trying to think of um, McCarthy, Joseph McCarthy.
oh,
Yeah. Nobody should have that kind of power. It just corrupts people.
hmm
It becomes overwhelming. The temptation to play God.
hmm
And,
yeah. I don't know. It just has evolved throughout the years into, you know, um, I would say CPS, but power mad, power hungry, running wild, destroying lives.
yeah, sadly, so many movements they start out with the best intentions, but then
hmm
people get their money gets involved, and temptation gets involved, and power starts corrupting, and yeah, it's very difficult to maintain the integrity of a movement.
hmm And wouldn't you say that patriarchy has hurt everybody, men and women?
Yeah, I would say that patriarchy is more victimized men. It has attempted to protect women, insulate women. Of course, you can reframe that as oppression, though.
hmm
But I think the intention around patriarchy has been to send men off to war, send men off to hard hazardous labor, send men off to prison. It's been at its harshest, accountability sans compassion with the men, and toward women, it's been compassion sans accountability, which has been an infantilizing effect. Um, it's been absolving women of responsibility, but to such an extent that, yeah, the women, you know, couldn't even own a credit card back in
Mhm.
the, back in the day. Um, Well, you didn't want to burden women with the responsibility of a credit card. So she didn't wield her credit card. She wielded his credit card instead,
Yeah.
And so he got the accountability, and she got patted on the head.
Mhm.
And I don't know which is better, which is worse. I mean, I don't know. I'm willing to call it even myself.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it just seems that, well, as you were brought up credit cards, everyone has their own credit card, and they're all running it up, right?
Most, yeah,
So,
yeah,
it's both sexes, just kinda doing what they wanna do, and some of them are just going their own way, not wanting anything to do with the other.
yeah. These days, it's gotten that bad, which is just very sad. I mean, it's
Mhm,
romance has always been one of the more joyous aspects to
mhm,
living, and it is extremely tainted now.
mhm.
The, the cynicism is dreadful.
I
Uh,
you know
nihilism.
Yeah, I've had both, like, on, my podcast, when usually after I end it, but people have said, if I would have known all this, I never would have gotten married." And I've talking to both men and women saying, "Don't get married. Just don't do it. Don't do it."
Yeah,
Or go to take us a step further, "Don't have kids. Just don't do it." That's what everyone is saying to you know.
right. Right. And you take that then globally and how nihilistic that is. That's,
Mhm,
we're talking about, yeah, everybody's happy that the population boom has stopped and is reversing in many cultures,
mhm,
but, and that's a good thing. And they're not really taking into account that it's, it's exponential in nature. If there's only half the children needed to replace the adults, and they grow up and they only produce half the children needed to replace the population, they're already cut to a quarter, and then it becomes an eighth and a 16th. So if nothing's done about it, it's potentially catastrophic. But also, it's already catastrophic from the standpoint that, well, if men and women are not, forming partnerships to have romance and children, it's a profound loss.
mhm,
Supposedly in Japan, oh, I hear that among those under 40 years of age, 25% have never had heterosexual sex.
mm,
Um, but I just think about the intersex Cold War that represents and the cost of that in terms of human happiness. And yeah, so the Japanese are scrambling trying to make these realistic dolls, uh, mostly for men.
mm,
Uh, how sad to
mm, mhm,
accept one of these silicone dolls in place of a real woman in your life.
mhm.
That's dreadful.
I also think there's more personality disorders out there than there ever have been,
I'm sure.
and it's unfortunately more, um, scarier to date. because you don't know what you're getting, and people don't know enough to really interview the person that they are potentially gonna marry, like, do you talk to your mother? Do you talk to your father?
Mm.
Or do you not talk, what's
Yeah.
the situation there? Dr. Mark Roseman wrote in his book, with this, child psychological abuse, parental alienation will destroy 6 generations. So, we're into how many generations which have caused personality disorders.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Mm.
there's no doubt that brutal or neglectful parenting breeds more pathology down the line,
Mhm.
naturally.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so maybe arguably, parenting peaked, like in the 50s
Mhm.
when we had extended families. It wasn't just a nuclear family, but grandma lived upstairs, and Uncle John was and Aunt Mary were across the street, and we had unofficial aunts and uncles that were just friends of the family, and so children were parented by a whole bunch of different people, and so often the story is told that well, my mom and dad, they had no time for me.
Mhm.
um they were always angry or whatever. I was mostly raised by my grandmother or my grandfather, and
Mhm.
now more and more they're not even in the picture.
Mhm. And you see people at restaurants all the time. Everybody's on their cell phones playing some game. They're not even communicating. It's like, these young people don't know how to seriously communicate.
Whole social fabric, what's happening to it?
Yeah, even texting, all that can be taken out of context. You could be texting something and someone could be taking it wrong.
Yeah, it's a very bad form of communication, isn't
Yeah.
it? That written word, if you don't take a lot of time to craft something very, very clear. Yeah, I call it email communication. Yeah, it's very triggering. I've experienced it myself where somebody sends some email and it pushes a button in me and I get enraged.
Mhm, mhm,
And a few days later, I look at the email again and I go, what was I upset about?
mhm,
Um, it's I'm sure as you know, like I don't know, 70, 80% of communication is non-verbal. It comes through tone of voice and
mhm.
hand gesticulations and
Yeah.
facial expressions and all that. And with all that taken away, it's so easy to misunderstand.
Yeah, and, it seems people have gotten emotionally unavailable through all these, devices that we have, the phones,
Yeah.
they've got more to entertain them than a friend or I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and the intersex Cold War is not helping.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I just don't know, because when all this witchcraft and, they were going after people, that was just, as we said, out of control, but
Yeah,
I wonder what
they didn't
else.
know any better. That's the thing. It
Yeah.
really wasn't evil in intent. It was terror.
Yeah.
It was absolute terror. They don't
Mhm.
know what was causing these plagues. Uh, what or who might be, you
Mm.
know, uh, how could they have a speck of a clue that it was microorganisms, for God's sake? They had
Mhm.
no idea. And there was terror around it. And the church acted out
Mhm.
because it was threatened, because it could not do anything about these plagues. It was completely helpless against it, and that eroded credibility for the church. And uh, what, what's the word for it? Sort of worship of paganism.
Mhm.
was growing. It was, you know, threatening the church. Um, and what does an institution do when it's threatened? Well, you know, it acts out. It gets to try and save itself. Doesn't excuse it or anything, but
Right.
it does help us to understand what happened.
Mhm. Yeah, the church acted out on a lot of things, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's just, there's just so much history where there was just so much terror, like you said.
Yes, neurosis,
Yes.
terror, life could come to an end at any moment.
Mhm.
It's just so precarious. You know, all you had to do was step on a nail,
Uh-huh.
tetanus. They're helpless against it. Maybe they know enough to be able to amputate your leg, but
Mhm.
without antiseptics, it was likely that the wherever they amputated would just get
Mhm.
infected. And so now you still die of the infection, only you had your leg sawed off. You know, as of course people were crazy
And they
with
were also
that anxiety.
yeah, and superstitious
Yeah, sure.
of all sorts of things. As far as, you know, the history of also witchcraft, there was, an older lady in the village that, you know, people were saying, you know, it was almost like ageism. Like, she's old, but yet she's a midwife and she's delivering babies, but, you know, we find her a threat, so she must be a witch.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, so there you are in the middle of one of these plagues, and all night you're hearing the screams of the dying, and in the day you're confronted with the stench of the corpses that are too dangerous to even bury. And
Mhm.
somebody says, "Well, that woman over there up the hill who lives alone there with her cat,
Mhm.
um, she's doing black magic." Well, that seems like as likely an explanation as any.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. And it's all this speculation that just has that's all people do is speculate, and they don't care to investigate to get to the real answer.
yeah. I had no way to get to the right answer.
Some answer, or at least a fair answer.
Yeah. Well, you know, the irony, they were killing all the cats. And of
Mm.
course the cats were the only things keeping the rats under control, and the rats were
Oh.
the ones that were spreading the plague.
Mhm.
They didn't know any better. They had no idea.
No, that's true.
You know, the real explanation was microorganisms. Well, yeah, sure. You know, who's gonna come up with that and figure that out
Mm.
before Leeuwenhoek invented a microscope to be able to see these things? There was you know, that was this magical oh, it's organisms you can't even see, they're so small. Well,
Mhm.
that sounds just as superstitious or crazy or a matter of fantasy as anything else.
Mhm.
So why not witchcraft? For all I know,
Right. Well, the occult and black magic,
alchemy,
yes.
yeah, there's another one.
And then you had these discoverers going to Haiti and seeing what was
uh,
going on over there.
uh, yep,
Uh,
scientific voodoo and yeah,
yep.
uh-huh.
Do you remember that movie, The Serpent and the Rainbow?
No,
Oh my god. That was I think that came out early '80s, mid '80s. It's a true story, based on a true story of a pharmaceutical company that sent this guy over to Haiti
uh-huh,
to, talk to one of these witch doctors to figure
yeah,
out how do they put someone into a zombie state.
right,
And so it was this puffer fish,
Hmm.
and you dry it out in some way and it turns you get powder out of the stupid thing. I don't know, but they wanted what the pharmaceutical company wanted was to be able to use this in anesthetic in the ORs.
Hmm.
That's why they sent him over there to do all this, but, Baby Doc was in power at that time. So, it got really crazy towards the end. I mean, it was a good movie, I thought, but there was a lot of superstition.
Sure, sure. Free
Yep.
science have no idea why things happen.
Mhm,
Not just diseases and things, but anything. Why does the thunderstorm happen? What is it? What caused it? I have no idea.
yeah.
Um, I don't know, some drought.
Mhm,
Why, they're looking around what's caused the drought. They don't know. Um, um, I mean, they don't even understand well, like what keeps the moon up there.
mhm,
It wasn't until Isaac Newton figured that one out.
mhm,
And they're just looking up there and no, what keeps the moon up there? No, no clue.
and
Uh,
then the Earth was flat for a while.
yeah, sure, sure. And of course, we were at the center of the universe naturally because we could look up at the sky and see that everything's going around us.
Mhm. Yeah, it's just very, the history of this whole world is just extremely fascinating. And so many people have suffered under, like, even, the Roman rule.
Oh God.
Um, they were pretty brutal.
Oh yeah.
Um
And yet they were actually quite advanced for their time.
Mhm,
They were usually only brutal to um, countries or factions that resisted them. And not every faction resisted them. There's that wonderful scene in Monty Python of the Life of Brian, where they're going on about what the Romans brought. You know, well, they brought what has the Romans ever done for us? Start listing these things. Well, there's the roads, there's the education, there's the medicine, there's the aqueduct. You know,
yeah.
and and yeah, so some like countries said, yeah, come on and conquer us, give us roads, give us all this great stuff. And if they didn't resist, then the Romans were enlightened enough to they were only brutal if they were to those who were resisted them.
Mhm.
Um, but
But they didn't make it that far up in Northern England. They couldn't take the weather. It was just too cold up there.
uh-huh,
And then the Vikings kept coming down and pillaging them.
uh-huh.
And I think the Vikings are the ones between them and the weather got them out and drove the Romans back
Is that
to
right?
yeah,
Uh-huh,
that's what I heard.
uh-huh. Well, the Romans, yeah. I mean, you talk about a lack of compassion.
Oh,
Everybody
yeah.
knows about the Colosseum, but until I started studying it, I didn't know that there were these so-called circuses all over the place. Every little region had their little arena where the entertainment was largely about torturing people to death,
Mhm.
and they'd just be there in the stands, and the more hideously the cry of pain, the more the audience cheered and applauded. Yeah, and then you can imagine they go home, and what kind of parents are they going to make,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Right.
So um, there was quite a thing about the Romans were losing population. They weren't having enough children. The children were being left out because they'd just be crying and squalling, and the parents would just go, I can't stand that anymore. Just
Yeah.
take them out to the field and just lay them out there under the sun. Get rid of them.
Oh.
It was like that. There was
Oh,
no,
no.
and they'd swaddle them so tight that they could sometimes be deformed.
Mhm.
or the sensory deprivation would put the zap on their little heads,
Mm.
or but they were crushed so that they would shut up.
Mhm.
Couldn't They just couldn't fathom this little infant making all this noise. And
Mm.
yeah, it's
That
weird.
is yeah, because when you know, you have a baby in the hospital, they're teaching you how to swaddle this baby. So it feels like they're being,
Oh yeah,
you know,
comforted. It's a
yeah,
nice little amount of it is great,
yeah,
but if
but not too
these
much.
elastic bands that are put around till the little thing is just crushed. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, it's been a
yeah,
brutal world between, like the witch hunts, and they always bring that out around Halloween that they talk about, the Salem witch trials, all the shows that are on the History Channel and things like that.
yeah. Lurid, stupid, false to fact nonsense. So they make a great little TV drama out of it, but
Uh-huh.
they don't try very hard to get at the deep truth of what was happening.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just been I don't know, it's a wonder anyone survived anything between
Oh,
the Romans, these Colosseums, torturing people at random, Vlad the Impaler,
yeah.
eh, and they just let these people run rampant with no accountability. Of course, they couldn't conquer them because they had armies.
Well, and they were terrified of him. Vlad the Impaler. I don't want to go up against that guy.
Yeah.
He would. Yeah, I mean, right. It would be just acres of men impaled, and of course, anybody who saw that would be horrified, and you'd run the other way. You don't want to mess with that
Mm-mm.
insane
Yeah,
nightmare.
it's bad.
It's that bad. Yeah. Well,
And it's
you know,
and that was life.
that was life. Yeah, in many parts of the world and many times in history. Yeah, there's always been some good places to live in the world, but I suppose they were not the norm,
Mm-mm.
unfortunately.
I think in that era, those eras, you'd have to be born into wealth
Yeah,
for it to be pleasant.
yeah,
Because if you were poor, oh,
that nightmare,
yeah.
the deprivation, the starvation,
Mhm.
yeah, the depth of fear all the time, all the time. No
But we
wonder
don't
people acted out.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, we don't know how lucky we are and what we've got running water in our homes. Some people do, some people are still in poverty, living in tents.
But
I've
there's less poverty though now. It's a matter of degree, as a
Mhm,
matter of percentages. The extreme poverty has been reduced steadily over the last
mhm,
some decades. Um, Rate of starvation has decreased markedly. The rate of infant mortality. We've done. You know, one of the things I would fault the extreme liberalism is that according to that ideology, we humans are but a pestilence upon this beautiful earth, and all they can see is the uh, humans as in the worst light.
mhm.
But we've made a lot of progress, and yeah, how about it? You go over to the wall and you flick the switch,
Yeah.
light comes on, and it comes on every time, absolutely guaranteed.
Mhm,
And there's heat, and there's flowing hot and cold water.
mhm.
These things are miraculous, and we don't appreciate them.
No,
We don't.
until there's, a power line down and you've got no power for 3
Yeah.
days in the winter.
Right, right, right. And then people are in a panic, because of the electricity's
Mhm.
electricity's been off for 12 hours.
Right.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
So, I mean, we have come a long way and, um, but still going back to the witch hunts, this is still going on to some degree.
Yes, in a lesser form, but yeah,
Mm,
there's a lot of different witch hunts that we've experienced in recent history. Moral panics would be another name for them.
mhm,
There was the the demonic cult moral panic that went through. I don't know what was that, late '80s or early
mhm.
'90s, where all these daycare centers were being accused of
Oh, yeah.
ritualistic, torture and killing of children and all that insanity. And there was the retrieved memories
Mhm,
catastrophe. That was horrendous. So then they were getting these children, and I was like, "Do you remember hands on you?" Or
mhm.
yes, I remember that. It's like so they pull these phony memories out of the kids, and under the assumption that the kids don't lie.
Mhm.
Well, they do
Yeah.
lie like crazy.
Mhm.
How did that vase got broken there, little Johnny? Oh, well, the dog did that, of course.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
yeah,
kids
that
lie like crazy.
oh, yeah. But there was a book that came out, I don't know if it was 1980 it came out, it was called Michelle Remembers. Did you ever hear of that one? It's written
Not that
by
one specifically. No, is that a retrieved memories?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, right. Until they finally proved that you could plant these memories, these false memories. That it was easy to do.
Mhm.
That you could just make something up and get a little kid to start saying that that was what happened.
Right, right, and this is also still going on when they wanna get a parent into trouble.
Uh-huh.
Ugh, it's just I don't know.
Yep.
It
Well,
puts you on a hyper vigilance mode. You're just
yeah, I'm going to claim that there's a witch hunt about toward men who complain, men who call themselves men's rights activists. Many of whom they're just men who complain. That's all.
Mhm,
Um, but they're being targeted like anything that is hate speech.
mhm,
Um, what else? Um, there's a witch hunt toward anyone who doesn't go with the woke agenda.
mhm,
Poor J.K. Rowling. The
mhm.
most innocent statements. Um, can be turned into this anti woke accusation, and
Yeah, yeah,
somebody gets canceled.
yeah,
James Damore worked for Google. He's a software engineer, and he was actually concerned that the cultural environment was not conducive to women, and he argued that women were different, and if you really want to be inviting to women, you need to accommodate this. They're feminine.
mhm.
Um, well, he was fired. That was you couldn't say that women were different, that men and women were different. So that's a witch hunt, getting rid of anyone who
Mhm.
you know doesn't go along with the dominant ideology.
Right, or the false narrative or whatever they're talking about.
Right, right, yeah,
Yeah, I just think people have to just calm down, and not be so harsh on each other. Some
yeah. It's like the Crusades. It's like God is on our side. It's like absolute certainty.
Mhm,
It's like Um, if little Mary says she thinks she's a boy,
Mhm.
then she needs gender affirming care so that she can affirm her gender identity.
Mhm.
And we're not going to look at maybe that Mary's two best friends are deciding they're going to be trans, so now she wants to be trans too, just because her friends are trans. We're not going to look at that. We're not going to look at anything like that. There's a thing called um, autogynephilia.
Mm.
Uh, it's a fetish.
Mm.
It's a certain number of men that get off on the idea of being women. The fantasy of being a woman is deeply erotic to them. And
Mm.
someone will take it as far as then to want to get um, surgery to become women. And is it really ethical to indulge someone's fetish to that degree? You know,
Mm.
deep, deep questions that we're not asking because we're not allowed to ask those questions. Uh,
Yeah.
hmm.
And we should be more verbal, and this goes back to being more verbal because we're on these cell phones all the time, or we're on the computer all the time. People are playing games on the computer or their phone. No one's being verbal. Communication skills have gone down the toilet.
I'm guilty of being on the computer a lot, but not the phone. People get angry with me because I don't necessarily get their email or their text
Mm.
or their voicemail or there's uh, what else is it? A Facebook message or oh my god,
Yeah.
I can't keep up with all that.
I can't. I can't either. And that's why I'm mostly on my phone working. I'm not playing games. I'll admit, all I have is a crossword puzzle that I do when I have time.
Uh-huh.
But my husband's saying, "All you do is play on your phone." It's like, "No, I'm putting a podcast together sometime on a phone, or I'm changing something in the podcast notes, or, I'm not do you think I wanna stare at that thing all night?" Yeah, it's just
What to do? What to do? Well, yeah, I mean the solution I come up with, yeah, is this whole gender equalism. I do feel that there's a terrible level of anxiety around gender equality.
Mhm,
We must have gender equality. And unfortunately, for most, that means what I call unisex equality. That
mhm,
is an exact sameness of equality. And to have that requires a certain measure of obliterating gender altogether.
mhm,
And I would try and shift the debate over to what I'll call balanced equality,
mhm,
where men and women would each have some measure of privileges that they would enjoy and the liabilities that go with it.
mhm,
And can't the sexes be a bit generous with each other
mhm,
and allow each sex to have their privileges, knowing
mm,
that each sex pays a price for those privileges. You don't get something for nothing in this world.
yeah,
Uh, so if women will take a kind of societal ownership of beauty, well, then they're going to have the burden that goes with it. Um, they're going to be objects of beauty to some extent. And if men will own toughness, strength, and courage, well, then men will have to prove it, and that's going to cost them.
mhm,
Um, it's going to cost them in hard hazardous labor and imprisonment and the battlefields, and
Mhm.
so yeah, there's it's the duality of all things.
Mhm.
It's just naive to think that you can have something for nothing.
Mhm.
If women will be extra protected, then women will suffer the condescension that goes with it. If women will receive extra charity, then women will suffer the extra dependence that goes with that. If if men will have economic power, if they will be the one with the big paycheck, then the cost will be devoting their lives to earning money. Others will spend and dying younger in the process. You don't get something for nothing. This
Mhm.
is how it works.
True.
And in our culture, in Eastern cultures, this is just duality 101. But
Mhm.
in our culture, it comes out in the form of like, um, well, there's no such thing as a free lunch. If
Mhm.
that's the case, then there's no such thing as a positive without an accompanying negative. And if every dark cloud comes with a silver lining, then every negative comes with a positive attached.
Mhm.
Uh, that is the duality of all things. And one of the many fails of feminism is that it only sees the positives for men, not the negatives, only sees the negatives for women, not the positives. Um, and it tells women that they can have it all, which is like saying you can have a free lunch.
Mhm.
Well, no, you can't. If you're going to have a high power career, it's going to cost you in terms of parental primacy. It's going to
Mhm.
cost you in terms of the uh, how well you can perform the motherhood role. If you have parental primacy, it's going to cost you in terms of the time and energy that you have left over to climb corporate ladders. It's duality to things.
Mhm. Yeah, you just can't have it all.
No,
If
and
you
when they
do, you
try, they exhaust themselves. It's
Mhm.
trying to do both.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm glad I had you back on. This was fascinating.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I probably
I
should have stretched the witch. I mean, I probably rifled through that too quickly. I really could have spent more time going into more depth about that, but
Oh, we
uh,
can. We'll just do another podcast.
okay.
So, okay, how can people reach you? And I'll put it in the podcast notes, but, people can reach you at, tagoldich@hotmail.com, and
Right.
you can also be found on Facebook. We are Gender Equalists, and LinkedIn as well.
Yes. Yes. On a rare occasion that I check my LinkedIn, it's
Oh,
one of the millions of social media I necessarily get to. But yes, I spent a lot of money on a great LinkedIn page, and
oh,
once in
hey.
a while I check it. Um, but yeah,
Nothing
no,
wrong.
no, just send me an email, tagoldich@hotmail.com. And be sure and put something in the subject like, slam the gavel,
Mhm,
so I will know what it's about. And I will be very happy to talk to anyone who would like to discuss any of these issues in more depth.
mhm. And we'll have another podcast, and we're gonna go in more depth with
Great.
these, witch hunts, um, that are so I always thought very scary, but, uh
Scary and fascinating and morbid and
yeah. Yeah,
horrible. And yeah.
definitely. But hey, don't jump off. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. And third book will be coming out approximately 2 months, Raised by These Wolves. Please join us again here with Tim Goldich and other exciting guests. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you, Marianne. It was great.
Thank you.